I'm Nick Whalen from RotoWire. I got two busts and two sleepers for you for the 2024 fantasy football season. We'll start with the sleepers, and we go to running back Chuba Hubbard of the Carolina Panthers, one of my highest rostered players across all my best ball teams. I mean, who's not fired up about the Carolina Panthers offense in 2024? But realistically, it can't be as bad as it was last season. New coaching staff, year two for Bryce Young. I'm not saying this is going to be a great offense, but I think they'll take a significant step forward compared to last year. You look at the depth chart, yeah, it's a bit of a mess right now. Hubbard, Miles Sanders still hanging around. They brought in rookie Jonathan Brooks out of Texas, but I see this as Chuba Hubbard's job to lose, at least to begin the season. Keep in mind, Brooks tore his ACL in November. He's on the NFI list. Likely won't see him until later in the season. Brooks could certainly be a threat to Chuba Hubbard later in the year, but early on, I think he has the edge over Sanders, who was a massive bust last season. Hubbard essentially took the job over by week 6 and never really looked back. He finished as the RB27 in PPR formats a year ago, now being drafted as the RB45 in the NFFC. He's going behind names like J.K. Dobbins, Ezekiel Elliott, basically has the same ADP as a clear backup in Ty Chandler for the Vikings. You could get Hubbard in the 12th or 13th round in a lot of drafts right now. At that point, you're basically throwing darts anyway. There just aren't many RBs on the board who have a clear path to a starting job like Chuba Hubbard does. And again, even if Carolina isn't the most appealing offense, and it's not for a number of reasons, you'd have to give the Panthers credit for making a point to at least address the offensive line in free agency. They brought in Damian Lewis. They brought in Robert Hunt in free agency. They brought in Josh Nijman from the Green Bay Packers, who was a solid lineman last season. Obviously, the goal is to protect Bryce Young, but I think this should be a much more competent offensive line overall that'll leak down into the running game. Again, I get the workload concerns once Brooks is healthy, but as far as guys available at this point in the draft go, I really like Chuba Hubbard's upside, especially over that first half of the season. Next on our list, Jakobi Meyers. You've heard me talk a ton about Jakobi Meyers this draft season, and for good reason. He's the wide receiver 53 right now in NFFC ADP, and much like the Carolina Panthers, nobody's super fired up about this Raiders offense, but I don't think it's as bad as we may think. You know, Gardner Minshew, Aiden O'Connell, are these good real-life quarterbacks? Not necessarily, but if you're going to be a bad team, you want that team to at least air it out for fantasy purposes, and both Minshew and O'Connell are willing to do that. I see some opportunity here for Jakobi Meyers. He's put up 3 straight 800-plus yard seasons, despite bad quarterback play in Vegas, bad quarterback play in New England. He racked up 106 targets in just 16 games last season, basically the same target share as Nico Collins, Brandon Ayuk. Found the end zone 10 times last season as well. Now, is that sustainable year over year? Not necessarily, but still a good sign for Jakobi Meyers working alongside Davante Adams. And look, if Davante Adams forces his way out of Vegas at some point, we could be looking at a half a season where Jakobi Meyers ends up being the wide receiver 1 for the Raiders. He's been a top 30 wide receiver in PPR in each of the last 3 seasons. Again, that all came with bad quarterback play. That's not going to change this season, but he's used to it. I think he can accomplish that feat yet again this season. For a guy going in the 10th round, Meyers, to me, one of the better late round values on the board at his position. Let's move on to the bust. Aaron Jones of the Minnesota Vikings. And this is tough for me. I love Aaron Jones. He's been one of my favorite backs in the NFL for a long time. And I'm not saying he's going to be a total bust, but there is definitely bust potential as Aaron Jones moves from Green Bay to Minnesota. There's considerable risk here for a guy who comes off the board at the end of the 5th, early 6th round. He's the RB18 right now in composite ADP. Finished last season as the RB26 in per game value, RB37 in total value. Now, of course, he missed 6 games. He was banged up for much of the season, in and out seemingly every week, but that's kind of who Aaron Jones is and has been for much of his career. Jones staying healthy in 2022, that was the anomaly. He's missed chunks of time in 4 of the last 6 seasons. He's battled both knee and hamstring issues throughout the last couple of years, especially last season, and he's set to turn 30 in December. I'm not sure we see that health trend reverse at this stage of his career. Keep in mind, Green Bay was one of the best offenses in football last year, top 10 run blocking unit in 2023. And to Jones' credit, when healthy, he still looked like he has plenty left in the tank. He finished the year with 5 straight 100-plus yard rushing games, but is that going to be possible in Minnesota? Vikings likely starting the year with Sam Darnold. They'll eventually transition to a rookie quarterback in J.J. McCarthy. I'm not saying this can't be a decent offense, but there's a defined ceiling here in year 1 with a rookie quarterback for the Vikings. Last season, Minnesota, one of the worst rushing attacks in the NFL. They were bottom 5 in attempts, bottom 5 in yards, dead last, which is 7 rushing touchdowns as a team. Obviously, they had the injury to Kirk Cousins that kind of derailed their entire season. Alexander Mattison wasn't the guy that we thought he could be. So there are reasons that we can point to, and there's a reason they brought in Aaron Jones after all. But there are just a lot of risk factors here for a soon-to-be 30-year-old back. This isn't Derrick Henry, landing in Baltimore, where it's all of a sudden a huge improvement in his team context later in his career. Now, Jones will be the clear starter. He should be the workhorse, but I have concerns about whether his body will hold up and what could be a shaky offense. In general, I just try to stay away from 30-year-old running backs, especially those transitioning to a new situation and one that I view as a notable downgrade for the first time in his career. Jones will certainly have his spike weeks. I don't mind him in best ball. I don't mind him as a flex, but I'm a little trepidatious if I'm taking Jones as my RB2 this season and kind of depending on him to be in there every week. Buying in on Aaron Jones, it requires a strong belief that he'll be able to put all those lingering knee and soft tissue injuries behind him. I just can't quite get there. All right, second on our list of busts, Michael Pittman of the Indianapolis Colts. Now, like Aaron Jones, I do like Michael Pittman, the player, but I just have too many questions about what this offense will look like with Anthony Richardson at the helm. He played just 2 full games as a rookie last season. And look, maybe it's an excellent offense. Maybe the Colts win the AFC South. Who knows? But will it end up being a productive fantasy offense for wide receivers? That's what we're concerned about. And that I'm not so sure. Richardson and Jonathan Taylor, they're going to control a ton of the red zone opportunities. Pittman could certainly do better than his 4 touchdown receptions a year ago, but I don't see there being a ton of room for improvement there. He's going to have to rip off big plays. Again, I like Pittman, the player, but you're incurring a decent amount of risk here for a guy you often have to take at the end of the second round. And to me, that means you're taking him at close to his ceiling. I don't see a whole lot of room for improvement volume-wise on last season's numbers. He was targeted 156 times. He hauled in 109 catches. Both of those were by far career highs. And of course, the vast majority of that production came with Gardner Minshew at the helm and what was a much more pass-friendly system. Pittman was also essentially the Colts' only option last year. They ended up spending a second-round pick on A.D. Mitchell. They're expecting more out of Josh Downs this season once he gets healthy. I'm not saying Pittman's not still the guy. He's clearly their number one, but I don't know that he's looking at a target share north of 30% like he had with Minshew at quarterback last season. For the year, Pittman had the 4th highest target share in the NFL. I just don't think that happens again. For what it's worth, his reception yards over-under at the DK Sportsbook right now, 950.5. That's well behind guys like Nico Collins, Jalen Waddle, Devontae Smith, Mike Evans. Take it with a grain of salt, but I think it's at least worth noting. For me, I prefer the upside of Collins or Waddle or even Cooper Kupp in that range. You can even wait around and get someone like Brandon Ayuk or DK Metcalf or Devontae Smith. All those guys have comparable floors, and arguably some of them have more upside than Michael Pittman. With Richardson, there's just not a ton of wiggle room when it comes to Pittman's productivity versus his ADP right now. You really can't afford Richardson needing any time to gel or ramp back up after missing so much of that rookie season. And obviously there are real volume concerns on top of that. 2 of Pittman's best games last season came in weeks 12 and 13, 21 catches, 212 yards, and a touchdown combined, but he needed 29 targets to get there. I don't see a lot of scenarios this season where Pittman's hauling in close to 30 targets over a 2-week span with Anthony Richardson at quarterback. With all this said, Pittman should have a nice floor. He should be a decent wide receiver 2 in fantasy this season, but I certainly don't want him as my wide receiver 1. I'm approaching this situation with some level of caution, and for the most part, I've just found myself passing on Pittman at his ADP. Now, when I say he could be a bust, it doesn't mean Pittman's going to fall off a cliff and all of a sudden he's like the wide receiver 40 this season. I think there's a pretty defined range for Michael Pittman, but to me, it means there's a better than 50% chance that he fails to meet or exceed that lofty ADP.